questions. Okay, so I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you, Dr. Drews, for introducing me. And I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to come here and listen today. Like she mentioned, my name is Dr. Danielle Lawson. I'm an assistant professor of both recreation, parks, and tourism management and science education at Pennsylvania State University. So Penn State, we are, if you've got any Penn State fans out there. And today, really, I'm here to just talk to you about some of the research that I do and look at how this thing called intergenerational learning is really impactful when it comes to climate change. But really, overall, I just hope that you all leave here knowing that you telling your climate story through the challenge or just talking through to your parents or even in your own communities, it can help solve climate change. So kind of jumping into that, I'm going to put up this picture here for a second, and I want everyone to look at it. I know there might be some classrooms looking at the same time, so we can't really necessarily raise our hands. But if the teachers want to put this in the chat, that would be great. Or if there's any individuals in the chat, that would also be awesome. By a show of hands, how many of you feel that your parents, your grandparents, aunt, uncles, foster parents, any older adult has ever taught you something? Yeah, so I see some hands raised. I see some hands raised. What about the people in the chat? Anyone there? If there's a teacher representing a group of students, are there some hands raised? Older adults teaching us something. Okay. Well, I'm going to guess people's hands are raised. Typically they are, myself included. I can think of lots of things that I've been taught as I've been growing, as I grew up from people who were older than me. But I'm going to flip the script a little bit. By show of hands, or just in the chat, letting me know that, yes, there are people raising their hands. How many of you feel that you have ever taught older adults something? Like I said, it could be your parents, your grandparents, aunts, your uncles, foster parents, adoptive parents. See another hand raised. I would be raising my hand for sure. And for those of you who are watching the recording, I'm gonna guess that there's at least some of you out there who are raising your hands. Yes, parents and technology. I'm sure there's some of you out there who have a cell phone and then your parents are looking at their cell phone and they're trying to text or something like that. Like I know my dad, when he tries to text sometimes, I'm like, what are you doing? So we teach our parents and older adults things all the time. So just keep that in mind, because we're going to start talking about climate change, but I want you to just think about it as I move through this presentation, how we can teach people who are older than us things, and we can be really impactful with that. So I put all of these pictures up here, and these pictures definitely don't encapsulate all of the impacts of climate change. But what it's going to show me is that climate change impacts all parts of our lives. I probably don't have to try to convince you all of that. You're here in the Student Climate Challenge. So you're worried about New Jersey and how climate change is going to be impacting your state. And there's a lot of scientists out there, and I'm sure you've heard about them, that are really concerned about climate change. So if we have young kids, youth, adolescents, teenagers, all concerned about climate change, and we have scientists out there that are concerned about climate change, why are we still so concerned about it? Why are we having problems with it? And really, to understand that, we have to understand about how do people form their opinions about things. So how do people come to a place to thinking about climate change, particularly with adults? Because the conversation out there, there's a lot of back and forth. Is it real? Is it not real? And to really understand why is we need to think about, we form our opinions on our day-to-day based on things like our personal experiences, how we see the world. So some people, you might have heard the term worldview. That's really just how we view the world. Politics and how we think about politics can impact how we think about, form opinions on things quite a bit. Our emotions, our gender identity, our gender expression, so our race, our ethnicity, culture. There are so many things that impact how we form our opinions. It's not just about, do we understand science? It does play a role, But all of these other things, like I mentioned, act kind of like filters, and they change the way we think about that scientific information. And this is important because our opinions or our attitudes about something inform how we act about it. So I'm sure all of us can think about something that our parents have been like, clean your room. And my attitude has been like, no, I really don't want to clean my room. And so then I eventually clean my room, but I do it in a way that's probably not the best, or I'm a little angry doing it. So that's how my attitude is informing how I act. And we do that with all different things, everything from climate change to what we eat. And so because of this, educators like your teachers, climate communicators like the people from Sustainable Jersey, they've had to come up with ways to talk about climate change in really interesting and specific ways that relates to people. So for example, here on the left, there might be some of you who know who this is. If you've seen the movie The Titanic, there might be others of you who are like, who is that? So this is Leonardo DiCaprio. And there's a poster and it says, climate change is real. We need to support leaders around the world who do not speak for the big polluters or the big corporations. So why are they using Leonardo DiCaprio? Well, they think that if we have someone who is a celebrity and people really like Leonardo DiCaprio and he says climate change is real, perhaps people will relate to that and be like, well, if Leonardo DiCaprio thinks it's real, I should too. Same thing over here. This is the Pope. And the Pope has made comments on climate change that the problem can't be left to future generations. So people that might think that the Pope's a really important leader might find it important. But the issue with these can be that if you like Leonardo DiCaprio and you really respect the Pope, this communication can work. But if you don't like Leonardo DiCaprio at all, you think he's the worst actor out there, or you don't even know who the Pope is, and you don't really know why he's important, it doesn't really have an impact on you. So that just kind of gets us to this place of that we need to find ways to communicate that work across multiple people of diverse backgrounds and experiences. And so I want to show something, why kids are unique, and kind of setting up the stage for why I think kids telling their climate stories can be so impactful. So this is a scientific study. I know there's a lot on here. I'm just going to give you the overall gist of what this scientific study is saying. So right here, egalitarian communitarians and hierarchical individualists, that's a type of worldview. So the way people see the world. And what they found is when someone was more scientifically literate, an adult, so how well they could understand science and use it to make decisions, and they looked at how much they thought climate change was a risk to them, they found that based on somebody's worldview, they were on opposite ends of the spectrum. So somebody who is scientifically literate, but ascribed to this worldview, they thought there was a lot of risk involved to climate change. But the same person who's just as scientifically literate and understands science just as well as this other person, they didn't think that it was very important at all. So people were dividing on the issue. So it just explaining that it's not just about how much we understand the science. But on the other side here, we have kids. And what we found, these were middle school kids, and I know there's quite a few middle schoolers in here, so y'all are really cool. I hope you know that. What they found was that kids, on the other hand, we can divide you into worldviews. We do that based on a series of questions. All of us fall into one of these worldviews. And we found that when you don't understand a lot about climate change, you're also divided. But that as we increase your knowledge about climate change, you actually come to a point where you agree with each other. So you're doing the exact opposite of what we see adults doing. They're dividing, y'all are coming together, which is really cool because usually we see adults do the opposite, like we said here. So that led us to ask, is there a way that we can have kids tell their stories and make the adults' graph look more like the kids' graph? And we think we can with this intergenerational learning that I introduced earlier that most of us have experienced. So it's a theory out there, and it says that when people of two different generations interact with each other, that knowledge, your attitudes about something, or even behaviors can go back and forth. So adults can teach kids and kids can teach adults. Most research and most of what we hear about in school looks at how do adults influence kids, but there's newer research out there that's looking at this opposite direction. So what kind of impact do kids have on the adults in their lives? And we've seen that kids can be really convincing. So for example, marketing. I'm gonna think of like Trix cereal. I think Trick cereal is still popular for most of you. I'm sure some of you have seen it. There's a commercial and it says, "Silly rabbit, tricks are for kids" at the end. That commercial is a cartoon. Same thing with like Lucky Charms or Fruit Loops. Those are all cartoons. Those aren't targeted at adults. If it was targeted at an adult, we would use something else that adults like. Most of our parents aren't watching Saturday morning cartoons. But adults make the purchasing in a household typically. So in some ways, the kids are influencing their parents. We've seen it with things like views of sexual orientation, that kids have influenced the way what their parents know about that information, their attitudes about it, and their behaviors. But if we move into more environmental topics, we've seen it work really well too. Everything from just conserving a specific animal or a plant. I'm sure some of you out there have an animal that you are so passionate about. When I taught 6th grade science, I remember some of my 6th graders being so excited about elephants, and we needed to save the elephants. I'm sure all of you have animals like that. Kids have been able to convince adults to do things about it. And then recycling. I'm sure most of you don't know, but I won't tell everyone how old I am, but when I was in elementary school, recycling was like the big thing. We had recycling competitions. Reduce, reuse, recycle was the conversation out there. And what they found is that through kids getting excited about it in school in the 90s, in the 80s, that's what led to recycling being spread across the country in the areas where recycling is easy to do. I live somewhere where recycling is not as easy to do, so that makes it harder. But in the areas where I used to live, like I'm from North Carolina, recycling became big because of kids like y'all, which is really cool. But if you see here, we don't have anything about climate change. You might be like, Danielle, Dr. Lawson, whichever you want to call me, where's the climate change? Well, that's what I studied when I was studying for my doctorate. I'm going to take a pause here. I know I've covered a lot of information. Teachers, students, I'm not quite sure how many of you are in the chat since I can't see you. If you have any burning questions that I'm missing, feel free to ask them now. I would rather you ask them when they're on your minds. You can type them in the chat and I'll try to see them. And if not, Andrea will make sure that I see it. So I just want to put that out there because I know I've covered a lot. So we know that kids can influence adults, but we haven't tested it with climate change. And so that's what I did. I had a research question. So think about the scientific method. I set up my question and said, does climate change education increase how concerned we are about climate change for both youth and their parents? And not just because we were teaching parents, but kids were talking about it at home and they were having an influence on it. So where did I do this research? This is the Southeast United States. So y'all are up here. This is North Carolina. I mentioned I'm from North Carolina. I did this research in North Carolina. And I specifically focus on this back half of North Carolina. So these are the coastal counties in North Carolina. So if you see all of these 20 counties, they touch coastal waters somehow. That's how we decided. And so what did I do? Well, I wanted to work with kids like y'all in schools. And so because of that, I wanted to train teachers and come up with a curriculum. Oh, it's a good one. Does anyone make a prediction? Do you think youth are going to impact their parents? I want to see if there's any predictions in there. And so teachers asked me, how do we get this intergenerational learning to happen? Well, we did things that when we were teaching kids about climate change, we taught them about local issues. So the kids in North Carolina weren't learning about what's happening in Antarctica or the Arctic. Instead, they were learning about what's happening in North Carolina in their own backyards. They focused on it for a long time. They got to do things in a hands-on way. I'm sure all of you have learned science, and when you get to do scientific experiments, I remember my students in 6th grade would get so excited when we'd have a lab day, and it was not as exciting when you were just having to do lectures. We had teachers that were super excited. All of your teachers here are already excited if they're agreeing to be here. For the majority, I think we can impact our parents' thoughts. I like it. That's a good prediction. But then the difference here is that we encouraged adults to participate in the lessons. Students, you got to interview parents and other adults. Yeah, someone else agrees. I like it. I like the hope that y'all have in how much you can influence it. Adults also got to visit with the activities that the students were doing because they got to go out and do a service learning project that was related to climate change. And some adults came, but they also got to interview their parents. And so what I've found is that this intergenerational learning can help empower the voices of youth working towards climate action. So what did I do? I had that section of North Carolina that I was working in. I recruited 16 middle school science teachers and assigned them to treatment and control groups. So that, because I'm setting up an experiment, the treatment group is going to get the treatment. In this case, it was this intergenerational learning curriculum. And then the control are the teachers who are just teaching their normal thing. So Taryn, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. I definitely changed your parents' view of climate and the environment. I was always quite passionate about the subject, and I taught my parents a lot about climate change. Absolutely, I love it. So I recruited these teachers into treatment and control groups. And then the teachers taught this curriculum. And they did the things that I mentioned before. They had that service learning project. So some of the students got to go out and collect plankton in southern coastal North Carolina and then upload it to NOAA's network and talk about how climate change was going to impact it. Some students got to go monitor sea turtle nests and see how did climate change impact it. And the students learned about it across the year. We focused on North Carolina, and then we encouraged the parents to participate, like I mentioned. And then we surveyed students and we surveyed parents, and we wanted to see what happened. So the next set of slides I'm going to show you are graphs. And I want to give everyone just a heads up. These graphs show the average, the mean of how concerned someone is about climate change. So the closer to 5, they're more concerned. Below 5, away from 5, towards 0, or below 5, less concerned about climate change. The red bars are going to be before, at the beginning of the school year. The blue bar is going to be at the end of the school year. And we're going to look at it based on the control groups, so the people that didn't get the curricular treatment, and then the treatment group. So what did we find? We divided people based on things that change how we think about climate change. So we talked some about that at the beginning, things like politics. So this is the control group. And what we found, parents who identified as conservative, identified as moderate, or they identified as liberal. At the beginning of the school year, they weren't very concerned about climate change. But at the end of the school year, there was some increases in concern. These funky bars that you see here, this shows us how much potential there is in the variability, because we're only talking about the average, but the average isn't representative of everyone, right? So that's what these bars are showing. So if you look at the differences between this bar and this bar, there's not a ton of change here based on politics. So this was in the control group, so the normal teaching end. But then those teachers who were trained with this intergenerational learning, look at these huge jumps. We see with conservative parents, moderate parents, and liberal parents. But what's really cool here is we're seeing this big jump with parents who identified as conservative. And typically looking at patterns in data, what we see is that people who identify as conservative tend to be less concerned about climate change. But here, when their kids were talking to them, they became very concerned about it, almost as concerned as parents who identified as liberal. That is really cool, because scientists and communicators have not been able to show this big of a shift, but kids did when they were given the power. Now we're going to look at it based on gender identity. So we're going to look at moms and dads. So this is the control group again. What we see is not a big jump from the beginning of the school year to the end, not much change. Same thing with the moms. But with the treatment group, we see really big changes for both groups, and a slightly bigger change here for dads. This is also really cool because we're talking about these patterns in data. People who identify as male or as a man from their gender identity tend to be less concerned about climate change than women overall. It's not that they're not concerned, they're just less concerned. So once again, when we give the power to kids, we're seeing that they can have a big impact with the people that typically aren't impacted as much, which is really cool. And last but not least, let's look at whether it was a son communicating to their parents or a daughter. And what we found is there wasn't much change in the control group once again, but then in the treatment group, there were big changes. And look at this massive change with daughters. What we found is that when we armed girls with great information about climate change, they changed the world. They changed their parents' world, which is really, really cool. Sons did too, which is awesome. So what does all of this mean? It's that when we give kids the power to do the communicating, to tell your story, you are incredibly effective. more effective than the rest of us on this call. You're going to be more effective in your communities and with your parents than any of us could. Doesn't matter the number of degrees or what we do as jobs. All right. And so much so that you can change trends that we see in research that show that when we use kids and we empower them to do the communicating, they can communicate and make differences with people that we typically can't. And that it's so important to engage y'all in the conversation. So what does this mean overall? Talk, and talk some more. Like AOC says, call your parents and use your incredibly powerful voice. So some of you might be sitting here and it's like, all right, Danielle, Dr. Lawson, what now? So if I could tell you like 5 things to remember about telling your climate stories and how to take actions. 1, be curious. Learn, ask about the information, learn about climate change. Ask about those things that you're confused about. 2, tell your story. All right, tell the story that's meaningful to you, because if it's meaningful to you, it's going to be meaningful to other people in your area. Invite others in. Don't be afraid to talk to others. Have hope. So get really excited and be hopeful, because I know climate change can be so overwhelming. Also, if someone doesn't agree with you the first time you talk to them, that's okay. Sometimes it takes time. So don't give up and have hope. And then 5 is be proud of yourself. You all are making a difference. I know you can't vote. You may not have the money that in terms of power that some people do, but you can make a difference. So you should be proud of yourselves. And so with that, I'm going to say thank you. Feel free to ask any questions. This is my email. If anyone wants to ever email me questions about this, you want to email me questions about college, any of it, please feel free. If any of you are on Twitter, this is my Twitter and this is my lab's Twitter, all my students. So I'm going to stop sharing now and y'all can ask me questions if you have any.
All right, so I do think we have a minute or two. If there's anybody has any questions, I'll be quiet for a moment, and then I always have a question. But I'll see if there's anybody who's watching us live. If you have any questions about the incredible impact that you all, and I mean legitimately, you all watching this video or watching us live have, please throw it in the chat, and we'll try to discuss it real quick.
This research came out and it exploded when it came out. So many people got so excited. So I hope you know it's not just me and Andrea trying to convince you like, yes, this is so cool. AOC tweeted about it. People were getting noticed. It is cool. Y'all are so convincing. So I welcome any questions in the chat, in the Q&A, if you're too nervous to ask it out loud. Did the parents admit in the study how much their students influence them? That's a great question. So they didn't. We didn't ask them that specifically because we didn't want to bias the information. We just wanted to see. We did some fancy statistics is what we did. And we could see that kids were the ones who made the change with them. We also wanted to protect whenever the students and the participants. So whenever we do research, we have to make sure that we're ethically doing it. So if you guys ever participate in research, you'll get consent forms, permission slips that your parents have to sign, all of that stuff. So I didn't actually know who the students and their parents were. I just knew them based on numbers. That's all I knew who they were, and that they were in coastal North Carolina.
So I know, of course, our summit here in the New Jersey Student Climate Challenge is focused on climate, but I'm curious if you think, based on your experiences, is this a unique, is this only in climate change? Or I know you had said there was some other research, with recycling and things like that, but do you think it would hold true in other areas too? Or do you think this huge impact is unique to climate change?
That's a great question. I don't think it's unique to climate change at all. In fact, we're doing research on different topics. We've done it with marine debris. So if anyone here is like, what do you mean about marine debris, Danielle? So it's trash that's in the oceans or the Great Lakes. Some of you might have heard of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. That's a big example of marine debris, but there's marine debris all over the ocean, not just in that Pacific Garbage Patch, unfortunately. And we've had 4th and 5th graders who have made huge impacts on their local communities, who've gone to town halls and got plastic bag bans inputted in their own communities. We're doing research with water quality and environmental justice. So we've done it in a few different areas as well. and not just in coastal North Carolina, all over the place.
Cool. All right. Well, I see, Danielle, that there was a request to if you know your little numbers better than I do. I could look it up, but I know you know your email better than I do. So there we go.
Yeah. Please reach out. Don't hesitate at all. My inbox is always open.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Danielle, and everyone listening. If you have other questions, please feel free to continue to put them either into the chat or the Q&A, and we will most likely have a few minutes at the very end. But I want to thank you, Dr. Lawson, of course, for your time. And I think we're going to go ahead and switch gears over to what would have been the second. There we go. So hi, welcome back, everyone. Let's see. Is there a published report? Yes, Danielle, I'm sure maybe your Nature article or some of the coverage of that would be awesome to add to the chat, just so they can dig into your research a little bit more, because I know you got great press coverage from so many different people to put it in the chat. That would be awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll put the citation to it since I can't upload a file.
Right. Okay, great. All right, so thanks folks for joining us. The other presenter that we had scheduled for today, his name is Jared Flesher. He is a filmmaker who grew up in New Jersey. I actually went to elementary my K-12 education actually was with Jared all through we both grew up in Hunterdon County, New Jersey, which is a bit north, maybe from where some of you, but we're kind of like north central. Unfortunately, he couldn't join us today at the last minute, but what he was able to do is to create some tips, and then I'm going to help you all think about how we tell stories around climate change. So taking Danielle's information about how you all have so much power and so much just the possibility of how you can impact your parents' understandings, your friends, your family members' understandings, especially around climate change. We want you to take that power and harness it and use it towards the climate contest. So the climate contest, which is a part of the New Jersey Student Climate Challenge, recently opened up. It just opened up on Monday, March 15th. So all of the resources are now available at that bit.ly address. So bit.ly/NJ Student Climate Challenge, and we'll put that link in the chat again. But all of the information about the climate contest is there. And basically what we're asking you to do is in student teams, come up with a project, come up with an action project related to climate change, do the project, and then create a digital story, which is a special kind of video that tells a narrative, tells a story about what happened and what you did and why you did it. So that's basically the climate contest. Do an action project, create a video about it, and share that video with us. So Jared was going to share some storytelling tips, especially as you're thinking about creating a video, especially a digital story. So what we're going to do is Jared was able to pre-record a short video for us that I'm going to share now, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more. But I want to warn you, so I am also a former middle school science teacher, so I have an assignment for you while we watch Jared's video. I would like you to think about, after the video, we're going to review some of, Jared's big ideas that he shared with all of you. But more importantly, he's going to talk about 3 things that make a good story. And so we're going to talk about those. And then we're going to put Jared's ideas to the test. And we're going to watch another video to see if those 3 things are present in the second video. So the first thing we're going to do is just watch Jared's video. And I want you to pay attention, be watching and be listening for the 3 things that Jared says that make a good story. All right, I just need to go ahead and share the right file. One moment, sorry.
Hello, filmmakers, video producers, visual storytellers of all kinds. Here we are on planet Earth, the one that's not too hot or too cold. I understand that some of you are about to take on a challenging project telling stories about the impact of climate change in your communities. The reason I'm here today talking to you is because I make documentary films and videos for a living. A lot of my work has been about the environment, and a lot of it has been specifically about environmental issues in southern New Jersey. So the first thing I want to do is welcome you to the club. You know, no one gives you permission to be a filmmaker or a storyteller, and you don't need to ask for permission. All you need is a story you want to tell and the determination to tell it to the best of your ability. So the moment you pick up a camera with the intention to tell a true story, whether it be a camera like this one or even just the camera on your phone, you become a filmmaker. I hope you take this job seriously. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. We all do. But be confident in your own ability and the power of your own voice. Here's a big secret. Telling stories about climate change can be really hard, and even the adults have not figured out the perfect way to do it. That's where you come in. People who study communication around climate change have realized two things lately. One is that older people like your parents and grandparents are far more likely to listen to stories about climate change when they come from young people like you than if they come from politicians or even scientists. So your voice really matters. And two is that climate change can sometimes feel like a really abstract issue, like something that's happening way out there in the atmosphere or some other place. But when you tell stories about how climate change impacts people at the local level, in their own communities, in your own communities, a lot more people are willing to listen. So what makes a good story? Well, stop for a moment and think about your own personal favorite stories, whether it be a movie or a book. The reason you like that story, I'm willing to bet, isn't because it's full of facts and figures and information. Those things do matter, the details. But what most people love about stories is the way the stories make them feel. So when you set out to tell your stories about climate change, keep this in mind. How do you want viewers to feel when they're done watching? Something else that most good stories have are interesting characters. Characters that you come to know and care about. When I set out to make a new film, I usually do have an issue in mind, or at least a question I'm trying to answer. But really, I feel like I'm not ready to start telling my story until I figure out who are the characters who are going to help bring my story to life. You might make yourself a character, and that can be really effective. But don't forget that you can also feature other people in your community and make them characters too. Now, this might seem really basic, but it's important to remember. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So at the beginning of the story, you usually meet your characters and you find out that they have some sort of problem or obstacle they need to overcome. And then in the middle of the story, you need to show them working, maybe even struggling to overcome that problem. And then at the end of the story, maybe they'll succeed. Maybe they won't. But this is where the drama is, following your character's journey from beginning to end. One more thing before I go. I hope you'll keep in mind some of the storytelling tips I just shared. They have worked well for thousands of years for millions of storytellers. But at the end of the day, the truth is there are no rules. You can tell your story however you want. You don't even need to ask permission. Good luck, and I can't wait to see some of your stories.
Okay, so hopefully, I know that's not quite the same as having Jared here, but some really great suggestions. So I have a few slides, but that kind of review some of his general tips, but then I hope you were thinking about it. What were those 3 big things that make a good story? So let me go ahead and pull up my slides. It'll be quick though, so don't worry. Sorry, I know it takes an extra second. All right, so let me come back. Oh, let me pull up the chat so I can see all you. Oops, hang on a second. All right. I see a question about getting access to Jared's recording. Yes, from this Zoom recording, absolutely. You'll be able to watch it again. And I will see what I can do about posting it as an additional supplemental resource. Because yeah, I love this. I mean, it's only 4 minutes long, but it's so much good information in my opinion. So some of the general digital story telling tips that Jared shared with us, hopefully you were able to catch these. Let's see. So, oh, I thought they were going to come up one by one. Oops. Oh, well. So it's about telling a story, right? You have to think about the beginning, the why. Why should someone care? Why should someone listen to you? He also said, don't be afraid to make mistakes. We're all learning through these processes. And I know, whether it's TikTok or just silly videos to share with your friends, you likely have some experience with creating videos, but thinking about it a little bit more is going to really help you as well. But, and as Danielle Dr. Lawson was talking about earlier, be confident in the power of your voice. Dr. Lawson talked about it. Jared talked about it as well. Youth have so much power and can be so persuasive to many different people, your parents, your grandparents, your friends, your extended family, your neighbors, etc. When you start talking about why climate change is important, they're going to listen to you, especially when we start telling stories about local climate. And yes, of course, it is very important that we're seeing melting ice caps and problems with polar bears and etc. But in South Jersey, especially when we're thinking about saltwater intrusion and when we're drinking water from wells and those wells are getting salty because of sea level rise, that's a local problem. Or when we're thinking about losing our coastlines or many other problems that we've been exploring all throughout this climate summit, I think is really important to be sharing those stories as well. So here's the quiz time. Sorry, it's not really a quiz, it's just, let's talk about it, or at least let's think about it. What makes a good story? So Jared talked about 3 things that make a good story. Anybody remember maybe one of those 3 things? You want to drop it in the chat? You did give lots of good tips. So lots of, yeah, how you make you feel, good characters. Oh, I love it. Thank you, folks. Yes. Struggling to overcome an issue. Awesome. Your suggestions just all hit all 3 that I was thinking about. And if any other ones want to come in, because we can kind of break some of these apart, but I love it. Thank you so much for your contributions. So first and foremost, one of the most important things about a good story is how it makes you feel, how it makes the viewer feel. Good information is important, but that emotional connection is really what's important. Then I see both Kelly and Ms. Mead brought up those ones. And then Cody brought up having a good character, and it could be you. You are your own characters, I'm sure. As I taught middle school and high school, I know some of you are characters in a good way, though, of course, right? So you can help others to understand the issue that's important to you. And then finally, as Annika brought up, and my apologies, I'm pronouncing any names wrong, but struggling to overcome an issue. So good stories have that beginning where you kind of meet the characters, introduce the issue, that middle where you're kind of overcoming the problem, overcoming the issue, and then the ending. Was there a resolution? Were the characters successful or not? Hopefully in your climate action projects, of course, I hope you'll be successful, but it's okay to have challenges because we're all experiencing challenges around climate change. All right, so what we're going to do, oops, let me stop my share real quick. We're going to watch one other video by Jared. And now this video, I will warn you, he did not make it about climate change. This is just another video that he has that was intended to be informational. So he didn't intend this video to be a digital story around climate change or a good story. Instead, he intended this to be an informational or like a promotional video. But what I'd like to still show it to you anyway. And as you're watching, I'd like you to think about how could we use Jared's 3 tips of thinking about how a story makes you feel, having good characters to tell the story, and having a beginning, middle, and an ending to the story. How could we improve this video to make sure that those tips are reflected? So that's your charge.
Whether they're small like a salamander
Sorry, that's your charge while we watch this video.
or big and wide roaming like a bear, wildlife need to be able to move through the landscape to find food, shelter, and mates. All the things they need in life. Their movements can vary by season, or by the need to go somewhere new, like this young bobcat's long meandering journey to find a territory of his own. New Jersey has done an outstanding job protecting open space for people and nature. Nearly a third of the state is now preserved thanks to proactive local governments and land trusts, our Green Acres program, farmland preservation, and the public, which has consistently voted in favor of open space funding. But that doesn't change the fact that we are the most densely populated state in the nation, and still growing. New Jersey is on track to reach build-out within the next few decades. The actions we take now will determine what our final landscape looks like, and how much room is left for wildlife to roam. And let's talk about roads. To help all of us busy people get around, we've crisscrossed the state with a dense road network. They're convenient for us, but for wildlife, roads are dangerous barriers that often stand in the way of reaching the things they need to survive. Millions of animals die every year trying to cross roads in the US, and in New Jersey, it's almost impossible to drive anywhere and not see dead animals lying on our roadways. Roadkill is a sad but familiar fact of life, a price for our own mobility. But for some species, roads can threaten the survival of entire populations. Put simply, as our wild lands get whittled away and wedged apart by urbanization and roads, so do our wild creatures. From these challenges, change was born. Connecting habitat across New Jersey is an effort to make our landscape and roadways friendlier to wildlife on the move. Protecting important habitats, restoring corridors for movement, making roads safer to cross. These are our goals. Led by the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, Change is made up of natural resource managers, transportation planners, conservationists, and researchers who have all come together to work toward a common vision of a connected landscape. And now we have some tools to share. Our interactive map shows the most important core habitats across the state and the best opportunities to link them back together. And our guidance document presents a menu of actions for preserving critical lands, enhancing habitat, and designing effective projects to help wildlife traverse roads and other barriers. Animal species here and all across the globe are up against ever-growing pressures in our human-centered world, and the ability for wildlife to move and adapt has never been more crucial. Here in New Jersey, we've got the tools. Let's give our wild animals every chance to find their way.
Okay, so what do you all think? I'll bring up the three things that make a good story again. But as I'm doing that, go ahead and start adding to the chat. What do you think? What parts did he hit? And what parts did maybe we didn't get quite the same kind of impact or the same impact from this type of video, from what he's suggesting? So let me go ahead and pull up my slides again. Yeah, Kelly gave the narrator gave lots of information. There we go. All right. Can you all hear me? All of a sudden okay. All right. So Kelly, yeah, the narrator gave lots of information. So the good information was important, you know, but the connection, how you made you feel. Yeah, I'm just, you know, thinking about seeing the animals, the roadkill, that certainly that's an emotional connection, but not necessarily a good one. It's a scary connection. It's a realistic connection, but it's one that doesn't make us feel good about what the problem is. So maybe that could have been a problem. What else was maybe missing, or what else was present in that video based on these 3 things that make a good story? Right. So we did see a problem was introduced, right? And that we're trying to fix. So, we're kind of getting at that beginning where you were introduced to the issue of, how these all habitats are across New Jersey, and how New Jersey is a very densely populated with humans area. The problem of roadkill and other environmental issues were introduced in the middle, and how they're trying to overcome it. And then towards the end, the organization CHANJ, which they say is change, they're trying to share how they're fixing this problem, right? You saw a video of like the helping animals to cross streets without getting hit by cars, which we call those like safer road crossings. We also, or this organization is trying to protect more habitat, but then also interactive maps and other tools. I noticed one big thing from these 3 that was definitely missing. Any thoughts? Well, hopefully you're thinking about it, but in my mind, sure, we had a narrator who gave a lot of really interesting information, but yeah, Kelly, I would agree with you. I didn't get to know anybody. There was no characters. There was no one who could really share with me what's going on. And yeah, Taryn, absolutely. Nobody that I can connect with as a viewer to really care about this issue. Because as we've been saying, this is a really important issue, especially in New Jersey. I know I've had my own fair share of run-in with deer, or seen plenty of animals along the roadside that didn't quite have a good outcome with a car. So how can we do something about it? But so that was an important issue to me, just because I know it's a local issue, but at the same time, there wasn't anybody in the video that I could connect with that could really get me engaged. And so that's where, thank you so much for your contributions as well, by the way, that's where I recommend that we take, or that you take your digital stories. I can support you with that, but take your digital stories and become characters in your own stories. When you're creating digital stories around your climate action projects, hopefully for our climate contest, or when you're even communicating, as Dr. Lawson Danielle was talking about earlier, we want to tell why it's important to us, why this is important to you, this issue of climate change. Become a character, share stories, share, maybe this issue around avoiding roadkill. Maybe, you were in a car accident when a parent or someone else was driving and hit a deer, and it was very scary. It can be very scary. Or, I hope it's never happened to anyone, but there are stories all the time about how our pets escape and then have an untimely accident with a car as well, because our New Jersey is just so densely populated. So all these kind of ways of connecting through digital storytelling is where we're hoping that you will take this, and especially pertinent when we're talking about climate change. I see that we only have a few more minutes. So I was going to ask some questions of all of you, but I think instead, and I've just lost my clock. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes left. So I think I would love to bring Danielle back up. And if anybody has questions for me, Jared has a link to his other documentaries. Absolutely, I can drop that into the chat. Jared's other films. So Jared actually has put together his most recent documentary is actually very pertinent for all of us in South Jersey. It is about off-roading in the Pinelands. And so it's called Pine Mud. And I will drop the film in, the link in. And award-winning in like film festivals and things like that. But yeah, he does some really amazing stuff, and I'll put that link into the chat. But any other questions for Danielle or I? I will also note that I know Danielle has offered to, she shared her email as well. There is Jared's website, or his film production company. And he did agree that if anybody has specific questions for him, that you can either share with me and I will share with him and we will get answers back to you. I'm putting my personal, or my work rather, email into the chat as well, that you could reach out to me and I can pass on questions to Jared. But one of the things that Danielle and I were going to encourage you all to think about, and Jared originally, is what stories are you all excited to tell about climate change? What's important to you? What projects are you interested in exploring? And then if there's any way that we can help you brainstorm, that would be awesome. But feel free if anybody has questions. Or what climate issue is important to any of you? If you've been participating, and I recognize many of your names from the prior sessions, what climate issue has stuck out to you that you might want to tell a story about or communicate with others about, take action on?
What about you, Andrea? What story do you think you would tell?
That is a good question. So I have been trying to get back into gardening. And so the one story that I would really like to tell is thinking about, I was just actually reading something recently about how monarch migration has been drastically impacted because of a number of things related to climate change and changing temperature zones and loss of habitat. And so trying to think about how we can provide better habitats for for the animals and for insects, and by having native plants, but then also the added benefits of using native plants in like rain gardens or other areas like that, I think are some kind of pandemic aware, but still an action project that I'm hoping to undertake myself actually this spring.
Love it.
So awesome. I see Kelly, agriculture and transportation issues, habitat loss. Yeah, some great ideas coming in. Yeah, Mead, I know it's schoolyard habitats and it's so much fun, and monarch gardens. Absolutely. So I think, if there's any other ideas or any questions, we'd be happy to address them. What about you, Danielle? I know we're almost out of time, but quickly, what about you, Danielle? What's your next climate issue to tackle in your new neck of the woods? 'Cause I know you recently moved to Pennsylvania.
It is environmental justice. So how do impacts
Mhm.
of climate change impact different communities differently?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, well, we'll leave the chat open for another minute or two if anybody else has questions, but I want to say on behalf of our program partners, Sustainable Jersey, of course, the Drumthwacket Foundation, Atlantic City Electric, and the Exelon Foundation, I want to thank you all for participating in today's session. I have so much fun talking with all of you and hearing your thoughts, but also I loved hearing all about Danielle's research and just reiterating the fact in my mind that you students have so much power, and we whatever we educators can do to support you, you're going to do amazing things. But I hope you can join us for the session tomorrow, and especially the closing session on Monday, where I and others with me will be talking a whole bunch more about how to get going with some of these climate action projects. And the recording of this session will be posted soon, and I can't wait to see you all again soon. Now remember, we would love your feedback, so when you close out the Zoom, there will be a pop-up webinar survey that we would love your feedback on as well. So please make sure to do that. It helps us to improve this session and future sessions. All right, thanks so much, folks. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.